Hi, today's story is my mother-in-law brought my 14-year-old a DNA kit for Easter because she wants her to find her real dad. My name is Dana Merritt. I'm 38 years old. I work as a forensic accountant for a mid-sized firm in Ohio, and for 13 years, I thought silence was the same thing as peace. I was wrong. The envelope in my hand weighed less than an ounce. It was high-quality linen paper, the kind lawyers use for final drafts, and it felt heavy enough to break the table. I stood at the entrance of Marcello's for exactly 30 seconds. Inside, the air smelled like brown butter and expensive garlic, a warm golden fog that couldn't quite mask the scent of the woman sitting at table 4. Cheryl. She was wearing something red, and she was laughing at something my husband had just said. Preston sat across from her. He was wearing the navy suit, the custom wool blend with a silk lining. It was the same suit he had worn on our first date 13 years ago, back when I thought his confidence was a shield he would use to protect me, not a weapon he would use to keep me in line. He lifted his wine glass, the stem delicate between his surgeon fingers, and the candlelight caught the gold of his wedding band. My wedding band. I walked to the table. I did not rush, and I did not drag my feet. Cheryl saw me first. Her laugh died in her throat, a sudden sharp choke of silence. She started to rise her chair, scraping against the hardwood floor, but I didn't look at her. I looked at him. Preston turned. The smile didn't leave his face immediately. It just froze, then curdled into something hard and medical. He looked at me the way he looked at a patient who had asked a stupid question. "Dana," he said. His voice was calm, perfectly modulated for a public space. "What are you doing here?" I pulled out the empty chair between them and sat down. I placed the envelope on the crisp white tablecloth and slid it across the distance between us. It glided over the bread plate past the untouched wine and came to rest against his hand. "Congratulations," I said. "You are free." Preston looked at the envelope. He didn't pick it up. For the first time in a decade, I saw a flicker of uncertainty behind his eyes. "What is this?" "Open it," I said. He picked it up. He broke the seal. I watched his eyes scan the first page, and I watched the exact moment the floor fell out from under him. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even fear. It was the total devastating collapse of a man who thought he was the smartest person in the room. His face went gray, draining of color, until he looked like part of the linen. He lowered the paper. His hand was shaking just a little. A tremor only a wife would notice. "You wouldn't dare," he whispered. "Do you want to read the second page?" I asked. "That one is from the district attorney." I stood up. The jazz piano was still playing something soft and irrelevant in the corner. "You should call a lawyer, Preston." Tonight, I walked out into the biting December wind, got into my car, and for the first time in my life, I didn't check the rearview mirror. 8 months earlier, I didn't know how to walk away. I only knew how to stay. It was Easter Sunday, and the dining room at Lorraine Calloway's house smelled like clove ham and aggressive floral perfume, white linen. She had worn it every Sunday for 40 years, and the scent seemed to have seeped into the drywall, turning the air thick and sweet. I sat at my usual spot on the corner of the table. Not the head, not the middle, the corner. It was the place where the table leg got in the way of your knees, the place for the person who spent most of the meal jumping up to refill water glasses. So Preston Lorraine said, her voice sharp enough to cut the meat. "Tell me about the hospital board." "I hear they are finally considering you for chief of surgery. They are mother." Preston wiped his mouth with a napkin. "It is between me and Felton, but Felton is retiring in 2 years. It is a formality." "Of course it is," she said. "You are a Calloway." My daughter Paige sat across from me. She was 14 with hair she had dyed a rebellious stripe of purple that Preston pretended not to see. She was pushing peas around her plate with a fork, her phone buzzing silently in her lap. I reached out and touched her hand. Just a tap, a silent code we had developed over the years that meant hang in there. Lorraine stood up. She walked to the buffet table and picked up a small box wrapped in bright yellow paper. She placed it directly in front of Paige. "A special Easter gift for my granddaughter," she said, her smile stretching tight across her face. Not chocolate this year, something educational. Paige looked at me, then at the box. She tore the paper. It was a plastic tube inside a cardboard sleeve. Ancestry DNA. I want you to know your heritage, Lorraine said, looking not at Paige but directly at me. The Calloways have strong Scottish roots. It is important to know where you come from, to know what blood you really have. The room went quiet. The sound of the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to get louder. Tick, tick, tick. This wasn't a gift. It was an accusation. Lorraine had never liked me, never thought I was good enough for her brilliant surgeon's son, but this was different. This was her putting a weapon on the table between the ham and the scalloped potatoes. Lorraine, I said. My voice sounded thin in my own ears. Paige doesn't need to do this. It is just a bit of fun, Dana, she said. Unless you have a reason to be worried, I looked at Preston. I waited for him to defend me. I waited for him to say that this was ridiculous, that, of course, Paige was his daughter, that we had spent thousands of dollars on fertility treatments, and he had been there for every single shot and every single appointment. Preston didn't speak. He reached for his wine glass, and as he lifted it, he smiled. It was a small smile, a smirk, really. It tugged at the corner of his mouth quick and sharp. I stopped breathing for a second. If he thought his mother was right, if he suspected I had been unfaithful, he should have been angry. He should have been humiliated. Or if he thought his mother was being a cruel old woman, he should have been annoyed. But he wasn't angry, and he wasn't annoyed. He looked satisfied. He looked like a man who already knew the answer to a question everyone else was just starting to ask. Paige looked at me, her eyes wide. Mom, it is fine, sweetie, I said, though my hands were cold. It is just a test. It doesn't mean anything. Paige put the box in her hoodie pocket. Lorraine went back to eating her ham, looking triumphant. Preston poured himself more wine. That night, after we drove home in silence after Paige had gone to her room with her headphones on, I found Preston in the kitchen. He was drinking a glass of water, leaning against the granite island I had spent 3 months saving for. Why didn't you stop her? I asked. He shrugged, not looking at me. She's just an old woman, Dana. She's obsessed with genealogy. You are being paranoid. Paranoid. She basically accused me of lying about Paige's father. You are tired, he said. He set the glass down. You always get emotional around the holidays. It makes you read things that aren't there. He walked past me, his shoulder brushing mine. He didn't look back. I stood in the kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. I washed his glass, I dried it, I put it away. He had called me paranoid. He had dismissed me. That was normal. That was the script we had been following for years. But I couldn't get the image out of my head. That moment at the table, that tiny, terrifying half-smile. He knew something. And for the first time in 13 years, I realized that I didn't know the man I was sleeping next to. 3 weeks later, the email from the DNA company arrived, and the ground I had been standing on for a decade didn't just shake, it vanished. 3 weeks is a long time to hold your breath. April in Ohio is cruel. It pretends to be spring with daffodils pushing up through the mulch, but the wind is still sharp enough to cut right through your coat. I spent those weeks living in 2 worlds. In one world, I was Dana Merritt, senior accountant, drowning in the final panic of tax season. I processed returns, I balanced ledgers, and I explained to a weeping bakery owner why she couldn't deduct her cat's vet bills as a business expense. In the other world, the one inside my house, I was a ghost. I watched Preston. I watched him the way you watch a crack in the ceiling, waiting to see if it's going to spread. He didn't know I was watching. He thought I was busy with the 1,040 forms spread out on the dining room table. But I saw him checking his phone every time it buzzed, angling the screen away from me. I saw the way he would leave the room when his mother called his voice, dropping to that low professional murmur he usually reserved for discussing terminal diagnoses. Lorraine called him 4 times that week. She never called 4 times a week. And Paige, my daughter, asked me about the results every single day. She would come home from school, drop her backpack on the bench, and look at me with that mix of hope and anxiety that only 14-year-olds can manage. Is it here yet, Mom? She would ask. Not yet, sweetie, I would say, keeping my voice even. These things take time. I was lying. I knew the processing times. I checked the status on my laptop every morning at 2 in the morning when I couldn't sleep. Sample received. Sample processing. Analyzing data. Every step was a countdown clock, ticking toward an explosion I couldn't stop. Then came Friday. It was 7 in the morning. The house was quiet, that heavy, thick silence of a suburban morning before the alarms go off. The sky outside the kitchen window was the color of a bruised plum. I was sitting at the island with a cup of coffee I hadn't taken a sip of in 20 minutes. My phone lit up on the counter. A single notification, your ancestry DNA results are ready. I didn't open it on my phone. I don't know why. It felt too big for a small screen. I opened my laptop. My fingers felt numb, like I had been sitting on them, but I typed in the password. Paige's profile loaded. A spinning wheel. Then the dashboard. I looked at the ethnicity estimate first. I don't know why I did that either. Maybe I was trying to delay the inevitable. 34% Ireland, 22% Scotland, 11% Scandinavia. It looked normal. It looked like the breakdown of every white family in Carterville. Then I clicked on the tab that said DNA matches. The list populated. First match, Dana Merritt, mother, predicted relationship, parent/child. That was me. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. A tiny irrational part of me had been terrified that I wasn't her mother either, that I had lost my mind entirely. I scrolled down. I was looking for Preston Calloway. I was looking for his name. I was looking for the confirmation that I was a paranoid, exhausted woman who had let her mother-in-law get inside her head. But the name Preston Calloway wasn't there. Second match, predicted relationship, parent/child. The name wasn't a name. It was a code. A0047 Connect, managed by user anonymous. I stared at the screen. The refrigerator hummed. The ice maker clattered, dropping cubes into the bin. The sounds of a normal morning. I clicked on the profile. No photo. No location. Just that code. A0047. I went back to the list. I scrolled down. Third cousin. Fourth cousin. Distant relative. I searched for the name Calloway. No matches found. I sat there. My coffee was cold. I picked it up and put it down just to feel the ceramic against my palm. I needed to feel something solid. Paige wasn't Preston's daughter. My husband, the man who had driven me to the clinic for every appointment, the man who had held my hand while Dr. Weston explained the intrauterine insemination procedure, the man who had celebrated with champagne when the steak turned pink. He wasn't her father. I didn't cry. I thought I would. I thought I would scream or throw the laptop or fall to the floor. But I didn't do any of those things. Instead, a strange cold clarity settled over me. It was the same feeling I got when I found a discrepancy in a client's audit. The numbers didn't match. And when numbers don't match, there is always a reason. I picked up my phone. I dialed Faye. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was thick with sleep. Dana? Is everything okay? I need you to come over, I said. My voice sounded flat, like I was ordering a pizza. What happened? Is it Paige? Don't ask questions, Faye. Just come over. And don't call anyone. I hung up. I sat there in the gray light of the kitchen, watching the numbers on the microwave clock change. 7:14, 7:15. Upstairs, I heard the shower turn on. Preston was awake. By the time Preston came home that afternoon, the house was silent again. Paige was at school. I had dropped her off and told her the results were still processing. I lied to my child's face without blinking. Faye was sitting in the armchair in the corner of the living room. She hadn't said a word in 2 hours. She just watched me. I was sitting on the sofa. My back was straight. My hands were folded in my lap. I was wearing the navy blouse Preston said washed me out. On the coffee table, I had placed a single sheet of paper, a screenshot of the DNA matches. The garage door opened. The rumble of his BMW pulling in, the engine cutting off, the heavy thud of the door closing. I knew these sounds. I had built my life around the rhythm of his arrivals and departures. The lock clicked. Preston walked in. He was carrying his leather briefcase and his dry cleaning. "Hello, Dana," he said, hanging his coat in the closet. He didn't look at the living room. He started toward the kitchen. "Preston," I said. He stopped. He turned. He saw me sitting there. He saw Faye in the corner. He saw the piece of paper on the table. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't ask why Faye was there. He walked into the room, set his briefcase down on the floor, and picked up the paper. He read it. He took his time. I watched his face. I was looking for shock. I was looking for the horror of a man realizing his wife had betrayed him, or the confusion of a man realizing there had been a mistake at the clinic. There was none of that. He placed the paper back on the table, aligning the edges perfectly with the wood grain. Then he sat down in the leather recliner opposite me. He crossed his legs. He brushed a piece of lint off his trousers. "I suppose we need to talk," he said. "I am listening," I said. He sighed. It was a disappointed sigh, the kind he used when a nurse handed him the wrong scalpel. "I want a divorce, Dana." The words hung in the air. He said them so easily, like he had been practicing. "I know this is difficult," he continued, his voice smooth and reasonable. "But it is clearly the best solution. I have prepared for this. I will be generous with the settlement. You and Paige will be taken care of." I looked at him. I really looked at him. "You knew," I said. It wasn't a question. He didn't flinch. He didn't deny it. "Biologically, she is not mine," he said. "We established that years ago, didn't we, when we had trouble conceiving?" "You told me we used a booster," I said. "You told me it was your sample just processed to increase motility. You never said anything about a donor. Details, Dana. Medical details. You were so emotional back then. I did what was necessary to give you the child you wanted." To give me the child I wanted, I stood by her, didn't I? He spread his hands, the picture of magnanimity. I raised her, I fed her, I paid for her piano lessons. The biology is a technicality. "If it is a technicality," I said, my voice dropping lower, "then why did your mother give her that test?" Preston paused. "Just for a second. Mother is getting old. She lacks filters." "No," I said. "You knew. You knew this was coming." He stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at me with pity. Pure condescending pity. "Does it matter, Dana? The marriage hasn't been working for years. This is just the final paperwork. I'll have my lawyer draw up the filing. It can be uncontested. Simple. Clean." He smiled. There it was again. That smirk. The same one from the Easter table. The smile of a man who knows the score before the game has even started. He thought he had won. He thought I would be so crushed by the shame, so terrified of the scandal, that I would sign whatever he put in front of me just to make it stop. He thought I was the same woman who had spent 13 years trying to make him happy. He was wrong. "Fine," I said. Preston blinked. He stopped halfway to the door. "Excuse me." "Fine," I repeated. "I agree to the divorce." He looked confused. Not because I agreed, but because I wasn't crying. He expected tears. He expected begging. He expected me to fall apart so he could put me back together in the shape he wanted. "Bring the papers," I said. "I will sign them." He nodded slowly, regaining his composure. "Good. That is sensible of you, Dana." He walked out of the room. I heard his footsteps going up the stairs. I sat back down. Faye finally moved. She leaned forward, her eyes wide. "Dana!" she whispered. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer her. I reached for the paper on the table. I looked at the code again. A0047. Preston knew. He had arranged it. He had swapped the sample. He had lied to me for 14 years every single day. But why? If he couldn't have children, why not just tell me why use a donor and pretend it was him? And why, now that the truth was out, did he look so relieved? Unless the donor wasn't random. Unless A0047 was someone specific. I picked up my phone. I didn't call a divorce lawyer. I scrolled through my contacts until I found a number I hadn't used since college. Nate Bergeron. He picked up on the third ring. "Nate," I said, "it's Dana. I need a favor. And I need you to not ask me if I'm okay, because I'm not." I hung up the phone. Upstairs, I heard Preston whistling. He thought this was the end. He thought he was closing a chapter. He didn't know I had just started writing a new book. Nate Bergeron's office smelled like stale coffee and old law books, a sharp dusty scent that was the complete opposite of the sterile antiseptic air of Preston's hospital. I sat in a leather chair that had cracked along the armrest, holding a styrofoam cup of lukewarm water I hadn't touched. Nate sat across from me. He had aged in the 10 years since I last saw him. His hairline had receded, and there were deep lines bracketed around his mouth, the kind you get from frowning at depositions for a decade. He was reading the printout. I had brought him the one with the breakdown of Paige's DNA results. He read it 3 times. Then he took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Dana," he said. His voice was quiet. "Run it by me one more time. Just the timeline." I took a breath. I kept my hands folded in my lap to stop them from shaking. "We tried to conceive for 2 years," I said. "Nothing worked." In 2009, Preston suggested we see a specialist he knew, Dr. Weston, at Meridian Fertility. We did 3 rounds of intrauterine insemination. Preston told me his count was low, that they needed to wash and concentrate the sample to make it viable. "And you signed consent forms?" Nate asked. "Of course, I signed stacks of them." "Did you sign a consent form for a donor no? Did you discuss using a donor no, Nate?" "I told you." Preston said it was his sample. He was adamant about it. He said he wanted a Callaway Air. Nate put his glasses back on. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the chaotic piles of paper on his desk. He looked at me not as a friend, but as a lawyer, assessing a blast radius. "If Preston used a donor without your consent, Dana, this isn't just a messy divorce. This isn't just a custody battle." "What is it?" I asked. "It is reproductive fraud," he said. "In Ohio, the laws are murky, but civilly. It is battery. It is a violation of your bodily autonomy. It is fraud. And if he knew the donor, if he handpicked someone else's genetic material and put it inside you without telling you," he stopped. He didn't need to finish the sentence. The silence in the room was heavy enough. Battery. The word tasted like metal in my mouth. I had spent 14 years thinking I was the one who had failed. I had spent nights crying in the bathroom because I couldn't give my husband a son, couldn't give his mother the genetic legacy she demanded. I had carried the guilt like a stone in my stomach, and the whole time he had known. "He stole my choice," I whispered. "Yes," Nate said, "he did." I looked out the window. Down on the street, people were walking to lunch. A woman pushed a stroller. A man checked his watch. Normal life happening just a few stories down, while my entire history was being rewritten in a dusty office. "So what do we do?" I asked. "We need proof," Nate said. "The DNA test proves Paige isn't his. It doesn't prove he knew. He could claim the clinic made a mistake. He could claim there was a mix-up at the lab. He could claim he is just as much a victim as you are." He smiled, Nate. At Easter, he smiled when his mother brought out the kit. "I believe you," Nate said. "But a jury won't convict on a smile. We need to find a donor. We need to know who A0047 is. And we need to prove Preston knew him." He tapped the paper with his pen. "If we can prove a connection between Preston and the biological father, then the mix-up theory dies. Then it becomes a conspiracy." I drove home in silence. The radio was off. The windows were up. I felt like I was driving someone else's car, living someone else's life. When I got home, the house was empty. Preston was at the hospital. Paige was at band practice. I walked into my home office, a small room off the kitchen that Preston called my hobby room, even though it was where I managed the finances for half the small businesses in Carterville. I sat down at my desk. I turned on my computer. I am an accountant. I don't know how to do surgery. I don't know how to navigate the intricate social politics of the hospital board, but I know how to follow a paper trail. I know that people lie, but money doesn't. Money leaves a footprint no matter how carefully you try to sweep it away. I opened our digital archives. I had scanned every tax return, every receipt, every bank statement for the last 14 years. It was a habit Preston used to tease me about. "You and your little receipts, Dana," he would say. Relax. I didn't relax. I organized. I pulled up the folder for 2010. The year Paige was born. I started scrolling through the deductions. Medical expenses were high that year. Prenatal vitamins, ultrasounds, the delivery at Mercy General. Then I saw it. It was buried in a list of miscellaneous medical consulting fees, a line item I had probably glazed over a dozen times in the past. Meridian Fertility Consulting, April 14th, 2010, $8,400. I stopped. April. I was 4 months pregnant in April. We had finished with the fertility clinic months before that. We had paid the final bill in January. Why was there another payment in April? I clicked on the scanned image of the check. It was signed by Preston. But in the memo line, in his cramped doctor handwriting, he had written, consulting fee, donor recruit. My heart hammered against my ribs. Donor recruit. Not donor bank, not anonymous pool, recruit. That implied effort. That implied selection. He hadn't just picked a vial from a freezer. He had found someone. I printed the page. The sound of the printer whirring to life felt loud in the empty house. I turned back to the computer. I logged into Paige's Ancestry DNA account again. I went back to the match list. A0047, no name, no photo. But there was a tab I hadn't clicked before. Shared matches. I clicked it. A list appeared. People who shared DNA with both Paige and the anonymous donor. Most were distant cousins' names I didn't recognize. But near the top there was a new match. It hadn't been there 3 weeks ago. D. Price. Predicted relationship, 4th to 6th cousin. Price. I stared at the name. It felt familiar, but I couldn't place it. Was it a neighbor? A client? I opened a new tab. I typed in the search bar, Price, Carterville, Ohio. The results loaded. An obituary from 2010. A LinkedIn profile for a graphic designer in Columbus. A news article from the Carterville Gazette archives. I clicked on the news article. Local man dies during routine surgery at Mercy General. The date was March 2010. 1 month before Preston wrote that check. I read the first paragraph. The family of Alan Price, 38, is demanding answers after he passed away following complications during a routine cardiac procedure on Tuesday. I stopped reading. I looked at the photo accompanying the article. It was a grainy, low-resolution headshot. A man with dark hair and kind eyes. He was smiling a genuine open smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. I looked at the photo. Then I looked at the framed school picture of Paige on my desk. She had his eyes. She had the exact same shape of the eyes. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, deeper than the one in the kitchen that morning. Alan Price died in March 2010. Preston paid a recruit fee in April. I looked back at the article. I scanned down to the end looking for the names of the medical team. It didn't list the surgeon. It just said Mercy General. But I knew. I picked up the printed check. I picked up the screenshot of the DNA match. I put them in a folder. Preston hadn't just found a donor. He had found a man who died in his hospital. I reached for my phone to call Nate, but my hand froze. If Alan Price was dead when Preston wrote that check, then who did he pay the money to, and how did he get the sample? You don't get a sample from a dead man unless you take it. I closed the folder. The room was dark, now the only light coming from the computer screen. I wasn't just looking at a lie anymore. I was looking at a crime scene. The name on the screen was Alan Price. I stared at the pixelated photograph for a long time. It was an obituary photo likely cropped from a family gathering. He was wearing a flannel shirt, the collar slightly askew, and he was laughing at something off camera. He had dark hair that curled slightly at the temples and eyes that crinkled at the corners. They were Paige's eyes. I sat in my home office, the glow of the monitor, the only light in the room. It was 2 a.m. Upstairs, the floorboards settled as the house cooled, a sound that used to comfort me but now sounded like footsteps. I printed the image. The printer hummed and spit out the page. I held it next to the school portrait of my daughter that sat on my desk. The shape of the jaw, the set of the ears, the way the left eyebrow arched slightly higher than the right. It wasn't a resemblance. It was a mirror. I put the paper down. My hands were shaking, not with fear, but with a strange vibrating energy. It was the feeling of a balance sheet finally zeroing out after days of searching for a missing decimal. I typed Alan Price Carterville into the search bar again. I needed dates. I needed a timeline. The obituary gave me the basics. Alan Michael Price, born 1972. Died March 14, 2010. Suddenly at Mercy General Hospital. March 14, 2010. I opened the drawer where I kept the family records. I pulled out Paige's baby book, a pastel yellow binder I had meticulously filled out 14 years ago. I turned to the first page. Estimated date of conception March 16, 2010. 2 days. There were 48 hours between the death of Alan Price and the conception of my daughter. I felt the bile rise in my throat. I pushed my chair back and walked to the window, pressing my forehead against the cold glass. The street outside was empty. The streetlights cast long orange shadows across the manicured lawns. Preston had told me the donor sample was frozen. He had told me it was from a bank in California, screened for genetic defects, high intelligence, and physical health. He had handed me a profile that listed the donor as a 25-year-old medical student who played the cello and liked hiking. Alan Price was 38. He worked at the local food bank. He died at Mercy General, my husband's hospital. I went back to the computer. I needed to know how he died. Obituaries use polite euphemisms. Suddenly, after a brief illness, surrounded by family, they rarely say medical error or surgical complication. I dug deeper. I scrolled past the funeral home guest book, past the automated genealogy sites. I found a link to a forum, an old message board for patient advocacy in Ohio that hadn't been active since 2012. The thread was titled Mercy General, Unexplained Deaths. There was a user named D. Price, Ohio. The post was dated August 2011. My brother went in for a routine valve repair. He was healthy. He walked into that hospital on his own 2 feet. The surgeon told us it was a standard procedure. 4 hours later, they told us his heart stopped and they couldn't restart it. They said it was a reaction to the anesthesia. But the nurse in the recovery room told me the surgeon had been up for 30 hours straight. She said he was shaking. I stopped reading. The room felt suddenly very small. The surgeon, D. Price didn't name him in the post, but she left a trail. I filed a complaint with the state medical board, she wrote. They dismissed it for lack of evidence. They protected their own. I opened a new tab. I went to the Ohio Medical Board's public disciplinary records. I searched for complaints filed in 2011 against Dr. Preston Calloway. Nothing. Of course, there was nothing. If a complaint is dismissed, it doesn't show up on the public record. It vanishes, it gets shredded, and buried in a basement in Columbus. But the hospital would have a record. The internal risk management logs would have a record. I looked at the username again. D. Price, Ohio. I went back to the obituary. Survived by his sister Dorothea Price, Dottie. The DNA match on Paige's account was labeled D. Price, predicted relationship 4th to 6th cousin. That made sense. If Alan was Paige's father, then Dottie was her aunt. But because the DNA testing company didn't have Alan's DNA on file, it was estimating the relationship through a more distant lens, or perhaps Dottie only shared a partial match through a grandparent. Or maybe the algorithm was confused because it didn't expect a 14-year-old girl to be related to a dead man. I printed the forum post. I added it to the folder, sliding it in behind the check for the consulting fee. $8,400. Paid in April 2010. Who got that money? If Alan died in March, the money didn't go to him. Did it go to Dottie? No. Her post was angry. She was looking for justice, not a payout. Did it go to the clinic to doctor? Western consulting fee. Donor recruit. The words on the check memo line seemed to mock me. Recruit. You recruit a living person. You don't recruit a corpse. Unless you recruit the person who has access to the corpse. I needed to know who was in the room when Alan Price died. I needed to know who had the authority to harvest genetic material from a patient who had just flatlined. That wasn't a standard procedure. That was a crime. That was battery. That was desecration of a body. And my husband, the illustrious Dr. Calloway, the man who was currently sleeping in our master bedroom under a 300 thread count duvet, had arranged it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the chair until the sun came up, watching the gray light filter through the blinds. I listened to the house wake up. The heater kicked on. The refrigerator cycled. At 6:30, I heard Preston's alarm. I heard his heavy footsteps on the stairs. I closed the folder. I locked it in the bottom drawer of my desk underneath a stack of tax returns from 2018. I went to the kitchen and started the coffee maker. Preston came down 10 minutes later. He was wearing his scrubs, the light blue ones that made his eyes look trustworthy. He looked rested. He looked like a man with a clear conscience. "Good morning," he said. He poured a cup of coffee. He didn't ask why I was already dressed. He didn't notice the dark circles under my eyes. He never noticed things that didn't directly affect his comfort. "Did you sign the papers?" he asked. The divorce papers were sitting on the counter untouched. "Not yet," I said. "I am reviewing the asset division." "Don't take too long, Dana. The offer is generous. I don't want to have to rescind it." He took a sip of his coffee, checked his watch, and picked up his keys. "I have a long day," he said. "Don't wait up." I watched him walk out the door. I watched him get into his car. I watched him back out of the driveway. He was going to Mercy General. I waited 1 hour. I took Paige to school. She was quiet in the car, her headphones on thumbing through her phone. She didn't ask about the DNA results. She knew I was hiding something. She had stopped asking because she was afraid of the answer. I dropped her off and watched her walk into the building, her purple hair flashing in the sunlight. She walked with a slight stoop, trying to make herself smaller. Alan Price had walked with his shoulders back. I had seen it in the photo. I didn't go to work. I drove to Mercy General. I didn't park in the main lot. I parked across the street in the lot of a 24-hour diner that smelt like old grease and despair. I had a clear view of the hospital administration entrance. I wasn't looking for Preston. I knew where he was. He was in surgery suite 3 or 4, playing God. I was looking for the gatekeeper. Every powerful man has a gatekeeper, a secretary, an assistant, someone who manages the calendar, who shreds the document, who knows where the bodies are buried because she helped dig the holes. I picked up my phone and opened the hospital staff directory. I had looked at it 100 times before organizing charity galas, sending Christmas baskets. But I had never looked at it like this. I filtered by administration. There were 6 names. 3 were new hires. 1 was a woman in her 60s I knew from the country club, a gossip who couldn't keep a secret if her life depended on it. Then there was Cheryl Barton, Director of Hospital Administration. I tapped on her profile. No photo on the mobile site. I switched to LinkedIn. Cheryl Barton, 35 years old. She had started at Mercy General in 2009. She had been there. In 2010, she would have been 21, an entry-level assistant. Or maybe an intern. Young, impressionable, the kind of girl a charismatic rising star surgeon might notice, the kind of girl who might do anything to feel important to a man like Preston Calloway. I watched the administration door. People came and went, doctors in white coats, nurses in scrubs, deliveries. At noon, the door opened. A woman walked out. She had red hair pulled back in a severe professional bun. She was wearing a tailored gray suit that fit her a little too perfectly. She wasn't carrying a purse, just a phone and a key card on a lanyard. It was the woman from the restaurant, the woman from my future, the woman I would hand an envelope to in 8 months. But right now, she was just Cheryl. She walked to the edge of the curb and lit a cigarette. Her movements were sharp, jagged. She smoked like someone who hated the habit but needed the nicotine to keep her hands still. A minute later, the door opened again. Preston walked out. He wasn't wearing his white coat. He was in his shirt sleeves, his tie loosened. He walked over to her. He didn't touch her. They stood 3 feet apart, the respectful distance of colleagues. But the air between them was thick. They weren't looking at each other. They were both looking at the traffic on the street. They were talking low fast. Preston gestured, with one hand a chopping motion. Cheryl shook her head. She took a long drag of her cigarette and exhaled a plume of smoke that drifted toward him. He didn't wave it away. He leaned in closer. He said something that made her shoulders stiffen. Then he checked his watch, turned on his heel, and walked back inside. Cheryl stayed on the curb. She dropped the cigarette and crushed it under the heel of her expensive shoe. She ground it into the pavement with a violence that made me flinch. She knew. She had been there in 2010. She had climbed the ladder from assistant to director in 14 years. You don't get that kind of promotion just by being good at spreadsheets. You get it by being loyal. You get it by solving problems. Or by hiding them. I started the car. The engine rumbled, but neither of them looked up. I was invisible. I was the wife, the accountant, the boring safe option Preston came home to when he was done being brilliant. I drove away from the hospital, my mind racing. Preston had needed a sample. Alan Price had died. Someone had to facilitate the access. Someone had to doctor the logs to show Preston was elsewhere or that the sample came from a legitimate source. $8,400. Was that the price of a silence? Or was that the cost of the logistics I drove to the library? I couldn't go home yet. The house felt contaminated. I found a quiet corner in the back near the genealogy section. The irony wasn't lost on me. I opened my laptop and pulled up the tax records again. I looked at the check again. Consulting fee. I looked at the date. April 14th. I opened a new search window. I typed in Cheryl Barton Carterville. I found her old Facebook page. It was locked down now private, but in 2010 people weren't as careful. Her profile picture from April 2010 was visible. It was a photo of a new car, a red Honda Civic. The caption read, "Hard work pays off. New wheels." I checked the date of the post, April 20th, 2010. 6 days after the check was cut, a Honda Civic in 2010 cost about $18,000. A down payment would be about $8,000. I sat back in the library chair. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Preston hadn't just paid a clinic, he had paid an accomplice. He had funneled the money through a shell company. Meridian Fertility Consulting didn't exist, I realized, with a start. Meridian Fertility was the clinic. Meridian Fertility Consulting was likely a bank account name he had set up or... Wait. I went back to the tax software. I pulled up the vendor list for that year. I clicked on Meridian Fertility Consulting. I looked at the tax ID number associated with the vendor. I opened the Ohio Secretary of State business search. I typed in the tax ID. No records found. It was a fake vendor. He had written a check to a fake company, which meant he had cashed it himself or given it to someone who could cash it at a check cashing place or deposited it into an account he controlled, or he wrote it to consulting but handed someone cash. I closed the laptop. I had the body Alan Price. I had the timeline, the 48-hour window. I had the motive, a narcissist's desperate need for an heir. I had the accomplice, Cheryl Barton, but I still didn't have the gun. I needed the medical record. I needed the proof that Preston was in that operating room. And more importantly, I needed proof of what happened after Alan died. I needed Dottie Price. And I needed to know exactly what she knew about the night her brother died. I packed up my bag. I walked out of the library into the late afternoon sun. It was blindingly bright, washing out the colors of the world until everything looked gray. I picked up my phone. There was a text from Paige. "Mom, are you okay? You didn't pick me up." I looked at the time. 3:45. I was late. I was never late. On my way, I typed. I drove to the school. Paige was waiting by the flagpole, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She looked small, vulnerable. She looked like Alan. I unlocked the doors. She slid into the passenger seat. "Where were you?" she asked. "Working," I said. She looked at me. She didn't believe me. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. "Mom," she said. Her voice was quiet. Someone messaged me on the Ancestry app. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I didn't look at her. I pulled out into traffic, merging carefully, signaling my turn. "Who?" I asked. "A woman," Paige said. "Her name is Dottie," she says. She says she thinks she is my aunt. I stared at the road ahead. The asphalt blurred. She says she has been looking for her brother's child for 14 years. I slammed on the brakes. The car behind us honked a long, angry blast. I didn't care. I pulled over to the shoulder of the road, the gravel crunching under the tires. I put the car in park. I turned to look at my daughter. "Show me," I said. Paige handed me the phone. The message was brief. "Hello, Paige. My name is Dottie." I saw our DNA match. "I don't want to scare you, but your father was my brother. His name was Alan. He died a long time ago. If your mother is Dana Merritt, please tell her to answer her phone. I have something she needs to see." I looked at the timestamp. 2 hours ago. Dottie Price hadn't just been waiting. She had been hunting too. I handed the phone back to Paige. "Mom," Paige whispered. "Is it true?" I looked at her. I saw the fear in her eyes, but I also saw the strength. She wasn't a child anymore. She was a Calloway by name, but she was a Price by blood, and Prices, it seemed, didn't give up. "Don't reply," I said. "Not yet." "Why?" "Because," I said, starting the car again, "we need to be careful." Careful of who? I looked at the road, stretching out toward the big house on the hill where my husband was waiting for his dinner. "Of your father," I said, and for the first time I didn't mean Alan. That night, the silence in Paige's bedroom was different from the silence in the rest of the house. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating quiet of secrets kept. It was the sharp, static, charged silence of a truth waiting to detonate. I sat on the edge of her bed. The LED strip lights she had taped around the ceiling cast a purple glow over her messy desk, illuminating the sketchbook she had left open and the half-empty water bottle. "You said careful of Dad," Paige said. She was sitting in her desk chair, hugging her knees to her chest. "Why?" I took a breath. I had rehearsed this conversation 100 times in my head, usually while scrubbing the shower tile or folding laundry. In my head, I was eloquent. In the purple light of a teenage bedroom, I just felt tired. "Grandma Lorraine wanted to hurt us," I said. "She wanted to prove you didn't belong in this family. Because I don't look like them," Paige said. She didn't say it with sadness. She said it like a scientist stating a fact. "Because she's a cruel woman," I said. But the test results, they showed something she didn't expect, and something I didn't expect either. Paige looked at me. Her eyes, so dark and intelligent, locked onto mine. "He isn't my father," she whispered. "Is he?" "No," I said. She didn't cry. She nodded once, a short, sharp movement. "Did you cheat on him?" "No, never." "Then how?" "We had help," I said. "We saw a doctor. We used a process called intrauterine insemination. Dad told me. He told me it was his sample. He told me he fixed the problem. But he lied." "Yes, he lied." Paige looked down at her knees. She picked at a loose thread on her sweatpants. "And the lady who messaged me, Dottie, she is the sister of the man who helped us," I said. I chose the words carefully. "Helped. Not was stolen from. Not died on a table. Is he alive?" "No, sweetie. He died before you were born." She went still. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the computer tower under her desk. "What was his name, Alan?" I said. "Alan Price." She repeated the name, tasting the shape of it. "Alan Price." She looked up at me. And in the purple light, I saw it again. The ghost of the man in the obituary photo. The set of the jaw. The spark in the eyes. "Does Dad know about Alan?" "I think he does," I said. "And that is why we need to be careful. That is why you can't answer Dottie yet. I am going to talk to her. I am going to fix this. But until I do, I need you to trust me." "I trust you, Mom." She uncurled her legs and stood up. She was taller than me now. She walked over and hugged me, a fierce, bone-crushing squeeze that reminded me she wasn't a child anymore. She was a Calloway by name, but she had the heart of a stranger I was just beginning to know. I left her room and closed the door. I stood in the hallway, listening to the house settle. I had told her the truth, but not the whole truth. I hadn't told her that her father might be a thief. I hadn't told her that her biological father might be a murder victim. I walked down the hall to the master bedroom. Preston was asleep. He was snoring softly, a rhythmic, untroubled sound. He slept like a baby. He slept like a man, with no conscience to keep him awake. I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't feel fear. I felt calculation. I needed the gun. 2 days later, on a Wednesday morning, I called in sick to the firm. I didn't drive to the library. I got on the highway and drove south. Cincinnati was 2 hours away. The drive was a blur of cornfields and billboards, the gray Ohio sky pressing down on the windshield. I rehearsed my lines. I practiced my face in the rearview mirror, not the scared wife, not the tired mother. The auditor. The woman who finds the missing money. Doctor. Carl Weston's clinic wasn't in the shiny medical district. It was in a strip mall next to a dry cleaner and a payday loan office. The sign was faded, the blue letters peeling from the sun. Meridian Fertility. Inside, the waiting room smelled of antiseptic and stale magazines. There was one other woman there, looking anxious and hopeful, clutching a purse in her lap. I walked up to the reception desk. The girl behind the glass looked barely 20. She was popping gum and scrolling on her phone. "Can I help you?" she asked without looking up. "I need to see Dr. Weston," I said. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but tell him Dana Merritt is here. Tell him I am Preston Calloway's wife." The girl stopped chewing. She looked up. The name Calloway meant something even here. Preston was a star in the state medical community. She picked up the phone. 2 minutes later, a door buzzed open. Dr. Weston was older than I remembered. 14 years ago, he had seemed distinguished, a silver-haired authority figure in a crisp white coat. Now he looked shrunken. His coat was slightly yellowed at the collar. His hands resting on the files on his desk had a tremor. He didn't invite me to sit. He stood behind his desk, guarding it like a fortress. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, "this is a surprise. How is the child?" "Her name is Paige," I said. "And she is 14. And she just took a DNA test." Weston flinched. It was small, a tightening of the muscles around his eyes, but I saw it. "I see," he said. "We know, Dr. Weston." I let the silence hang. In an audit, the silence is your best weapon. People rush to fill it with explanations. "We know Preston used a donor," I continued. "We know it wasn't his sample." Weston licked his lips. Preston assured me. "He said you had discussed it. He said it was a private matter between husband and wife." "He lied," I said. "I never agreed to it." Weston sank into his chair. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "I assume you knew." He was very convincing. "He said you were too emotional to handle the technical details, that you just wanted a baby." I stepped forward. I placed my hands on the edge of his desk. "I want to see the consent form. I can't show you patient records without a subpoena. I am the patient, Dr. Weston. It is my body. I want to see the form where I signed away my right to know whose child I was carrying." He looked up at me. His eyes were watery, defeated. "There isn't one," he whispered. My heart hammered against my ribs. I kept my face stone. "Excuse me, Preston?" He brought the sample himself, in a cryo tank. He said he had procured it from a private bank. He gave me the technical specs. He signed the intake forms and my signature. He said he had your verbal consent. He sent me an email confirming it, he said. He said paperwork would just upset you. I stared at him. A doctor, a medical professional. He had performed a procedure on me based on an email from a husband who said, "Trust me." "Print it," I said. "What? The email? Print it. Now." He hesitated. He looked at his computer, then at the door as if looking for an escape. "Dr. Weston," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, "if you don't give me that email, I walk out of here and I go straight to the police. I file a report for assault. I tell them you impregnated me with unknown genetic material without my consent. That is a prison sentence. But if you give me the email, if you show me that you were duped to, that you were just following the instructions of a manipulative spouse, then maybe you are just a witness." He stared at me for 5 seconds. Then he turned to his keyboard. The printer in the corner whirred. A single sheet of paper slid into the tray. I picked it up. From P. Calloway at mercygen.org to Queston at meridianfertility.com. Date the 16th of April 2010. Carl, regarding the sample for the Merritt procedure. I have discussed the substitution with Dana. She is on board but fragile. Do not burden her with the paperwork. I authorize the use of donor lot A47. Proceed with the IUI as scheduled. I will handle the legalities on this end. Preston. He authorized it. He explicitly told the doctor to bypass my consent. He admitted to the substitution in writing. I folded the paper and put it in my purse. "Thank you, doctor," I said. I walked out of the clinic. The sun was shining on the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. I felt lightheaded. I felt invincible. I had him. This wasn't just a hunch anymore. This was proof. Hard documentary proof of reproductive fraud. I sat in my car and took a picture of the email. I sent it to Nate. Then I drove to the nearest post office. I had the complaint forms for the Ohio State Medical Board in my glove compartment. I filled them out right there on the center console, my pen digging into the paper. I attached a copy of the email. I sealed the envelope. I dropped it in the mailbox. The metal clank of the lid closing sounded like a gavel. I thought I had won. I thought the nightmare was over. I drove home with the windows down, letting the wind whip my hair. I imagined the look on Preston's face when the board investigators showed up at his hospital. I imagined him stripped of his license, stripped of his arrogance. I didn't know that the receptionist at Meridian Fertility had recognized the name Calloway. I didn't know she had texted her cousin, who worked in billing at Mercy General. And I didn't know that by the time I crossed the county line, Preston already knew I had been there. The call came the next morning. I was in the kitchen making toast. The sun was streaming through the window, bright and deceptively cheerful. My phone buzzed on the counter. Preston. I stared at it. He never called in the morning. He was usually in surgery. I picked it up. Hello, Dana, he said. His voice was calm. Too calm. We need to meet. I am busy, I said. Make time. Meet me at Lou's Diner. 12:30. Why to discuss Paige, he said, and to discuss your trip to Cincinnati. The line went dead. My stomach dropped. The toast popped up in the toaster, startling me. He knew. I called Nate. He didn't answer. I left a message. He knows. I am meeting him. Nate texted back 2 minutes later. Don't go alone. But I had to go alone. If I brought a lawyer, it was a declaration of war. If I went alone, maybe I could still play the role of the confused wife. Maybe I could gauge how much he knew. Lou's Diner was neutral ground. It was a greasy spoon on the edge of town where truck drivers and shift workers ate. Not the kind of place Preston Calloway usually frequented. I got there at 12:25. I sat in a booth near the window. I ordered a coffee. Preston walked in at exactly 12:30. He was wearing a suit, no tie. He looked immaculate amidst the smell of frying bacon and old coffee. He sat down across from me. He didn't order anything. He placed his hands on the table. He looked at me with that same clinical detachment he had used at the restaurant in my vision of the future. But there was something else in his eyes now, something sharper. You went to see Carl, he said. I drank my coffee. My hand was steady. I marveled at that. I did. And you bullied an old man into giving you private correspondence. It proved you lied, Preston. It proved you assaulted me. He laughed, a short, dry bark of a laugh. Assault, Dana, please. I gave you a child. I gave you the family you were desperate for. I fixed a biological failure. You should be thanking me. You used a donor without my consent. You used a fake company to pay for it. And you know exactly who that donor was. He leaned back. He didn't look worried about the fraud accusation. He looked amused. You are constructing a fantasy, Dana. A conspiracy theory. And do you know what that looks like to a family court judge? I froze. What I filed a motion this morning, he said. Emergency custody. Full custody of Paige. You won't get it, I said. You have no grounds. I have plenty of grounds. I have a wife who is exhibiting signs of paranoia. A wife who is harassing retired medical professionals. A wife who is obsessing over internet conspiracy theories about dead people. He leaned forward. His voice dropped to a whisper, intimate and terrifying. I have colleagues who will testify to your instability, Dana. I have records of your emotional episodes over the years. And if this goes to court, if you try to drag my name through the mud with the medical board, the first thing the newspapers will print is that the local accountant is accusing her prominent husband of stealing sperm from a dead man. He paused. Imagine what that will do to Paige. Imagine the school hallway. Imagine the whispers. Everyone knowing she is the daughter of a corpse and a crazy woman. I felt the blood drain from my face. He wasn't fighting the fraud. He was weaponizing the child. You wouldn't, I whispered. I would, he said. I will do whatever is necessary to protect my reputation and to protect my daughter from a mother who has clearly lost her grip on reality. He stood up. He threw a $20 bill on the table. Drop the complaint, Dana. Call the board and tell them you made a mistake. Tell them you were off your medication. Do it by tomorrow. Or what? Or you will never see Paige again. He walked out. The bell above the door chimed cheerfully. I sat in the booth. The coffee in front of me was cold. The victory I had felt yesterday, the invincible lightness of having the proof, was gone. It had been replaced by a heavy, suffocating dread. I had the email. I had the truth. But he had the power. And he knew exactly where to stick the knife. The war didn't start with a scream. It started with a declined debit card. I was at the grocery store, standing in the checkout line with a cart full of milk, eggs, and the specific brand of organic peanut butter Paige liked. I swiped the card. The terminal beeped a harsh dissonant chord. Declined. I tried it again. Declined. The cashier, a teenage girl with glittery eyeshadow, popped her gum. Do you have another form of payment? I pulled up my banking app. My thumb hovered over the login button. When the screen loaded, the balance was zero. Not just zero. It was frozen. A red banner across the top read, Account locked, pending legal action. He hadn't just threatened me. He had nuked the site. I paid with a credit card I kept for emergencies, one solely in my name, with a low limit. I drove home with the groceries rattling in the trunk. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to grip the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. When I walked into the house, Nate called. He filed an ex parte motion this morning, Nate said. His voice was tight. He is claiming you are unstable. He is asking for temporary emergency custody and exclusive use of the marital residence. He froze the joint assets to preserve the estate. He can't do that, I said. I was standing in my kitchen, staring at the peanut butter jar. I am not unstable. I am the one who pays the bills. I am the one who drives her to school. He is a doctor, Dana. In this county, that is practically royalty. And he has an affidavit from a psychiatrist colleague who claims you have a history of paranoid episodes. I dropped the jar. It hit the floor with a heavy thud, but didn't break. He is lying. I know, Nate said. But until the hearing next week, you are in a defensive position. He wants you to panic. He wants you to scream at him or show up at the hospital, making a scene so he can call the police and prove his point. I looked at the plastic jar rolling across the tile. I won't scream, I said. Good. Because while he is looking at the custody case, we need to look at the murder case. The custody filing was a distraction. It was a flare thrown up to blind me. Preston didn't want Paige. He wanted to bury the evidence of what he had done in 2010. I needed to talk to the one person who knew his schedule better than he did. I didn't call Cheryl Barton. I didn't text her. I went to the one place I knew she went every Thursday at 1 o'clock. The Daily Grind was a coffee shop 2 blocks from Mercy General. It was upscale, quiet, and sold the kind of overpriced salads hospital administrators ate to feel healthy. I sat at a small table in the back, nursing a black coffee. Cheryl walked in at 1:10. She looked tired. The professional veneer was still there, the tailor suit, the perfect hair, but her eyes were red-rimmed. She ordered a latte and a scone. She turned to find a table. She saw me. She froze. For a second, I thought she would turn around and walk out. But Cheryl wasn't a coward. She was a survivor. She tightened her grip on her cup and walked over to my table. She sat down without asking. You are causing a lot of trouble, Dana, she said. Her voice was low. I'm looking for the truth, Cheryl. He says you are having a breakdown. He says you are harassing old doctors. And what do you think? She looked at me over the rim of her cup. Up close, I could see the fine lines around her eyes. She wasn't just the other woman. She was a woman who had spent 4 years managing the ego of a narcissist. I think Preston is very good at controlling the narrative, she said carefully. I leaned forward. I didn't raise my voice. I know you were there in 2010, I said. You were an assistant in administration. You handled the travel logs. You handled the expense reports. She blinked. Just once. I know Alan Price died on March 14th. I know Preston operated on him. And I know Preston built a fake company for a donor recruit fee 1 month later. Cheryl looked out the window. A siren wailed in the distance, heading toward the emergency room. That is all circumstantial, she said. Is it? I asked. The medical board might think so, but the district attorney looks at things differently. If Preston was impaired during that surgery, if he was exhausted, that is manslaughter. Cheryl put her cup down. Her hand trembled. I am not going to testify against him, Dana. He would destroy me. You see what he's doing to you. He froze your accounts. He is trying to take your daughter. If he does that to his wife, imagine what he would do to an employee. I don't need you to testify about the affair, I said. I don't care about the hotels. I don't care about the dinners. Then what do you want? I want to know where he was the weekend before Ellen Price died. She stared at me. The silence stretched between us, heavy and thick. She was calculating the cost. She was weighing her loyalty to a man who would throw her under the bus against the risk of helping a woman who could bring the whole hospital down. She took a breath. He went to Louisville, she whispered. Louisville. There was a conference, a cardiac symposium. But he didn't go for the lectures. He went with someone, not me. I wasn't in the picture then. It was a pharmaceutical rep. When did he come back? She looked down at her hands. His flight landed at 6 in the morning on Tuesday. He came straight to the hospital. He showered in the doctor's lounge. What time was Ellen Price's surgery? 8 o'clock. I felt a chill run through me. He had been up all night. He had flown in at dawn, and 2 hours later he cut open a man's chest. Can you prove it? I asked. Cheryl looked up. Her eyes were hard now. I managed his archives, Dana. I have scans of every receipt he submitted for reimbursement since 2009. He is meticulous about money. He never misses a deduction. She reached into her purse. She pulled out a napkin and a pen. She wrote a series of numbers on it. This is a burner number, she said. Don't call me at the hospital. Don't call me on my personal cell. She slid the napkin across the table. If I give you the records, she said, I want immunity. I want to know that when this house of cards falls down, I am not under it. I took the napkin. I will talk to my lawyer, I said. Cheryl stood up. She smoothed her skirt. She looked down at me, and for the first time, I saw respect in her eyes. He thinks you are weak, she said. He tells everyone you are fragile. She slung her purse over her shoulder. He is wrong. She walked out. I watched her go. I had the timeline. Louisville. 6 a.m. arrival. 8 a.m. surgery. Now I just needed the proof that something went wrong in that operating room. I went home to an empty house. Paige was at school. The silence felt heavy, oppressive. At 4 o'clock, the doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite ring. It was a demand. I opened the door. Lorraine Calloway stood on my porch. She was wearing a tweed coat and holding a fruit basket wrapped in cellophane, an absurd prop for an ambush. Hello, Dana, she said, stepping past me before I could invite her in. Lorraine, I said, I wasn't expecting you. I came to see my granddaughter. She's not here. She's at band practice. Lorraine set the fruit basket on the entry table with a thump. She turned to face me. The smell of white linen filled the hallway, cloying and suffocating. This has gone far enough, she said. Her voice was sharp, the way she spoke to servants. Preston called me. He told me about your episode, about you harassing Dr. Weston. I didn't harass anyone. I asked for the truth. The truth, she laughed, a harsh, dry sound. The truth is that you are embarrassing this family. You are dragging my son's name through the mud because you are insecure about your marriage. Your son committed fraud, Lorraine. He stole genetic material. He lied to me. And he lied to you. She stiffened. She adjusted her pearl necklace. Preston did what he had to do. The Calloway line had to continue. If he used assistance, it was because you couldn't provide it naturally. I stared at her. She knew. She didn't know the details maybe, but she knew it wasn't him, and she didn't care. As long as the name carried on, the blood didn't matter. Or maybe it did, and that was why she gave Paige the test to punish me for a sin her son had committed. Get out, I said. Excuse me, get out of my house. She drew herself up to her full height. This is my son's house, and I have grandparents' rights. If you think you can keep me from Paige, Paige is 14, I said, my voice low and steady. She is terrified of you. She knows you gave her that test to hurt us. And if you think a judge will grant you visitation after I show them the text messages you sent her, you are delusional. Lorraine's face turned a blotchy red. You will regret this, Dana. You have no money. You have no family. Preston will crush you. He will take that girl and you will end up in a studio apartment wondering where it all went wrong. I opened the door. The cold air rushed in. I have more family than you think, I said. She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes full of venom. Then she turned and marched down her heels, clicking on the pavement like gunshots. I slammed the door. I leaned against it, breathing hard. I was shaking, but not from fear, from rage. That night, the house felt like a fortress under siege. I had put Paige to bed early, telling her everything was fine, lying through my teeth. I sat in the kitchen. The only light came from the open refrigerator door as I stared at the shelves, not seeing the food. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was 11:47. A number I didn't recognize. I picked it up. Hello, is this Dana? The voice was female odor. It sounded rasping like someone who had been smoking for 40 years or crying for 10. Yes. Who is this? This is Dottie Price. I sank onto a kitchen stool. The room seemed to tilt. Dottie, I said. You found me, she said. My niece, Paige. She messaged me back. She gave me your number. I told her not to. She is a smart girl, Dottie said. She said you needed help. I closed my eyes. Help wasn't a strong enough word. I need to know what happened to Alan, I said. Dottie let out a long, ragged breath. He went in for a valve repair. It was supposed to be simple. He texted me that morning. He said, see you at lunch. She paused. I could hear the static on the line. He never came out. Dr. Calloway came out 4 hours later. He looked like he had been in a fight. He told us there were complications. He told us Alan's heart just stopped. He lied, I whispered. I know, Dottie said. I knew it then. I filed a complaint, but they buried it. They said I was grieving. They said I didn't understand medicine. But, about a month later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photocopy of a handwritten note. It was from the attending resident on duty that night. A Dr. Felton. The name Preston had mentioned at Easter. The man he was competing with for chief of surgery. What did the note say? It was a personal log. Dottie's voice trembled. It said March 14th, subject price. Primary surgeon Calloway arrived 0745, visibly fatigued, tremors noted during prep. During pump transition, Calloway nicked the artery. Reaction time delayed approximately 4 minutes. Patient lost on table. Calloway altered the operative report to reflect anesthesia reaction. I gripped the phone so hard, my fingers hurt. Altered the report. That was the smoking gun. Do you have it? I asked. Do you still have the note? I have the photocopy, she said. But Felton, he denied it when I asked him. He wanted to keep his job. He wouldn't verify it. Where is Felton now? He retired. He lives in Dayton. I looked at the clock on the microwave. Midnight. Dottie, I said. Can you meet me? Can you bring the note? I have waited 14 years for someone to ask me that, she said. Yes. I hung up. I felt a surge of hope. A photocopy wasn't perfect, but it was a start. If we could find Felton, if we could pressure him. My phone rang again immediately. It was Nate. Dana, he said. He sounded exhausted. I have news, I said. I have a witness. I have a note from the resident who saw Preston kill him. Stop, Nate said. Just listen to me. Something in his voice made me stop. The cold dread from the diner returned settling in my stomach. What is it? Preston's lawyer just sent over a document package. They are submitting it to the medical board tomorrow morning to squash your complaint. What document? They have an affidavit, Dana, from the nurse who was in the room during your IUI procedure in 2010. I frowned. There was no nurse, just Weston and Preston. Her name is Sarah Miller, Nate said. She claims she was there. She claims she witnessed Preston explaining the donor substitution to you. She claims she witnessed you giving verbal consent. She claims you were happy about it. That is a lie, I said. My voice rose. There was no Sarah Miller. It was just them. It doesn't matter, Nate said gently. It is a sworn affidavit. It corroborates Preston's email. It paints a picture of a husband and wife making a difficult choice together and a wife who who is now rewriting history out of spite. But it's a lie, without proof, Dana. Without a recording or a signed document saying otherwise. It is her word against yours. And she is a licensed nurse. You are the angry ex-wife. I stared out the window into the black night. The medical board is going to dismiss the complaint, Nate said. They will see this as a domestic dispute, not a medical violation. And the custody judge, he will see this as you making false accusations to alienate the father. He paused. We are losing Dana if you don't have something concrete, something undeniable. This is over. I lowered the phone. I had the timeline from Cheryl, but she wouldn't testify. I had the note from Dottie, but it was a photocopy and the author had denied it. I had the truth, and Preston had a lie that was perfectly constructed, signed, sealed, and delivered. I stood in the dark kitchen. The hum of the refrigerator sounded like a countdown. All is lost. The phrase floated through my mind. This is what it feels like when the walls finally close in. I looked at the folder on the counter. The tax return. The check, $8,400. Preston bought a nurse. He bought a fake witness, just like he bought a fake company. I wasn't losing because I was wrong. I was losing because I was playing by the rules and he was buying the referees. I picked up the phone again. I dialed Dottie back. Dottie, I said. My voice was steady now. Cold. Bring the note. Bring everything you have. But your lawyer, Dottie said. My lawyer is playing defense, I said. I am done playing defense. I hung up. I walked upstairs. I stood outside Paige's door. I could hear her breathing. I wasn't going to let him win, not this time. If he wanted to play dirty, I would show him what happens when you push a forensic accountant into a corner. I wouldn't just find the money, I would find the bodies. The darkest hour is a cliché, but it is also a physics problem. Light doesn't just disappear, it is blocked. And sitting on the floor of my living room at 3 a.m, surrounded by 14 years of tax returns and family photo albums, I finally understood what was blocking mine. It wasn't Preston, it was me. I had spent a decade making myself small so he could feel big. I had edited my own life the way I edited a messy spreadsheet, hiding the discrepancies, smoothing over the losses, convincing myself that if the bottom line balanced, the business was healthy. I opened the wedding album. It was heavy bound in white leather that had started to yellow at the edges. I turned the pages. There was Preston smiling that practiced camera-ready smile. There was Lorraine looking like she was attending a funeral. And there was me, 24 years old, eyes wide, looking at him like he was the sun and I was just lucky to be in orbit. I turned the page. 5 years later. A Christmas party. My smile was tighter. My eyes looked tired. 10 years later. Paige's birthday. I wasn't even in the picture. I was the one holding the camera. He hadn't just stolen a donor's genetic material. He hadn't just stolen Alan Price's life. He had stolen mine. He had hollowed me out year by year until I was just a vessel for his reputation, a silent partner in his fraud. And now he wanted to take the last thing I had left, Paige. I closed the album. The sound was final like a door shutting. I wasn't the victim. I wasn't the defendant. I was the auditor. And in my world, when you find fraud, you don't ask the embezzler for an apology. You don't negotiate. You seize the assets. I stood up. My knees cracked. I walked into the kitchen and made a pot of coffee, strong and black. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. I worked by the glow of the under-cabinet LEDs. I texted Nate, I am coming in at 9. Clear your schedule. Then I texted Dottie. Meet me at the lawyer's office. Bring the note. The sun came up at 6. It washed the kitchen in a cold gray light. I showered. I dressed in a charcoal suit I usually save for IRS audits. I put on heels that clicked sharply against the hardwood. I woke Paige up. She looked at me with sleepy, confused eyes. Mom, you're wearing a suit. Get dressed, I said. I am taking you to Faye's house. You are going to stay there until tonight. Why? Because I have work to do, I said. And when I come back, things are going to be different. She didn't argue. She saw something in my face that hadn't been there yesterday. Nate's office looked different in the daylight. The dust motes dancing in the sunbeams looked less like decay and more like potential energy. Dottie Price was already there. She was sitting in the reclined chair, her purse clutched in her lap with both hands. She looked exactly like the woman I had imagined worn down by grief, but held together by a wire of stubborn resolve. When I walked in, she stood up. She looked at me, searching for her brother in my face maybe, or just searching for an ally. "Mrs. Calloway," she said. "Dana," I corrected. "Just Dana." She nodded. She reached into her purse and pulled out a plastic sheet protector. Inside was a piece of paper yellowed with age. It was a photocopy of a handwritten log. I took it. The handwriting was jagged, hurried. March 14th. Attending appeared fatigued. Judgment calls questionable during complication stage. Delayed response to BP drop approximately 4 minutes before corrective action taken. Note written for personal record only. It was signed Felton. I handed it to Nate. He read it, his face unreadable. "It is powerful," Nate said, "but it is a copy, and Felton is retired. If we depose him, he will likely stick to the official story to protect his pension. He will say, 'This is a forgery.'" "I know," Dottie said, her voice small. "That is what the board told me in 2011. Nate looked at me. "Dana, without corroboration, this is hearsay. Preston has a sworn affidavit from a nurse saying the consent was legal. We have a photocopy from a retired doctor saying he was tired. The judge will side with the paperwork." "He wasn't just tired," I said. I was pacing the small office. My mind was moving fast, connecting the dots I had gathered over the last 48 hours. "Cheryl said he was in Louisville," I said. "She said he flew back the morning of the surgery." Nate frowned. "Louisville, that is a 40-minute flight. But the timing, Nate, he landed at 6 in the morning. He went straight to the hospital. So, surgeons work long hours." "He was at a conference," I said. "A pharmaceutical conference. Or at least that was the cover. He was with a woman." Nate took off his glasses. "Okay, so he is an adulterer. That doesn't prove manslaughter." I stopped pacing. I turned to Dottie. "What time did Alan go into surgery?" 8 o'clock, she said instantly. "It is burned into my brain." "He landed at 6, I repeated. "He prepped at 7. He cut at 8. I looked at Nate. If he was up all night, if he was partying or drinking or just not sleeping. "And he operated 2 hours after landing. That is impairment. That is reckless disregard." Nate nodded slowly. "It is. But we need to prove he was on that plane. We need to prove he didn't sleep." I pulled out my phone. "Cheryl Barton manages his expenses. She has scans of every receipt." Nate looked skeptical. "The administrator, the one you confronted, why would she help you? She works for him." "Because she is smart," I said. "And she knows that when a ship sinks, the rats drown first unless they find a life raft." I dialed the number Cheryl had written on the napkin. It rang 4 times. "Hello," her voice was guarded. "Cheryl," I said. "It's Dana. I told you not to call unless it was an emergency." "It is an emergency," I said. "But not for me, for you." There was silence on the line. "Preston filed for custody," I said. "He is submitting fake affidavits. He is going scorched earth. And if he is willing to perjure a nurse to take my daughter, what do you think he will do to the administrator who kept his secrets when the police start asking about the financial fraud? He will blame you, Cheryl. He will say you managed the books. He will say you set up the fake consulting company. He will say you embezzled the money and he was just a busy surgeon who signed what you put in front of him." I heard her breath catch. "He wouldn't," she whispered. "He would," I said. "He absolutely would. You are the perfect scapegoat. You have access. You have the motive. I let that sink in. But if you give me the flight logs, if you give me the proof that he was in Louisville and flew back that morning, then you aren't the scapegoat. You are the whistleblower." Silence. Long, heavy silence. "I need immunity," she said. Nate leaned forward toward the speakerphone. "I can't grant immunity," Nate said. "I am a family law attorney. But I can tell you that if you provide evidence of a crime before you are indicted, the district attorney looks very kindly on that, especially if that evidence proves manslaughter." Manslaughter, Cheryl's voice cracked. We have the note from Felton, I lied. I made it sound like we had the original, like we had Felton himself in the next room. We know he was impaired. We just need to prove why. Cheryl made a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh. Okay, she said. Check your email. The line went dead. I looked at Nate. He was already refreshing his inbox. 3 minutes passed. The longest 3 minutes of my life. Dottie was twisting a tissue in her hands. I was staring at the dust motes. A ping! Nate clicked the mouse. He opened a PDF file. It was an expense report from March 2010. Scanned receipts attached. Item 4, dinner, the Oak Room, Louisville, KY, 11:45 p.m. 2 guests, alcohol included. Item 5, hotel, the Sealbach Hilton. Checkout 4:30 a.m. Item 6, Delta Flight 492, Louisville to Cincinnati. Departs 5:15 a.m. Arrives 6:02 a.m. I looked at the receipts. 11:45 p.m. dinner. 4:30 a.m. checkout. He hadn't slept. He had been out drinking until midnight, maybe later, then caught a red-eye flight, drove to the hospital, and killed a man. And then, to cover his tracks, to fill the void he created, he stole that man's genetic legacy and planted it in his own wife. It wasn't just negligence. It was pathology. My God, Nate whispered. He printed the pages. He laid them out on the desk next to the Felton note and the fake consulting check. This is it, Nate said. This is the timeline. I looked at the spread. The check proved the fraud. The note proved the negligence. The receipts proved the impairment. And the DNA proved the cover-up. It was a perfect circle of destruction. And Preston Calloway sat in the middle of it, thinking he was untouchable. I turned to Dottie. We have him, I said. She started to cry. Quietly at first, then harder the 14 years of grief, finally finding a place to land. I put my hand on her shoulder. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Nate was already typing. I am drafting a submission for the district attorney, he said, and a supplemental filing for the medical board, and a motion to dismiss his custody claim based on criminal conduct. He looked up at me. This is going to destroy him, Dana. He will lose his license. He will go to prison. The scandal will be enormous. I know, I said. Are you ready for that? I walked to the window. I looked out at the street at the ordinary people, living their ordinary lives. I thought about the woman who had stood in the kitchen, making toast, terrified of her husband's mood. She was gone. I turned back to them. I'm not just ready, I said. I am impatient. I picked up my purse. Where are you going? Nate asked. I have one more thing to do, I said. I have the papers. I have the proof. Now I need to deliver the message. I am going to invite my husband to dinner. Friday morning arrived with the sky the color of a fresh bruise, but inside my kitchen the light was clinical and bright. I woke up at 6. I made coffee. I didn't drink it. I stood in front of the printer in my home office. It was a rhythmic mechanical sound, the paper sliding through the rollers warm and sharp with the smell of ink. Page 1. The email from Dr. Weston admitting the substitution. Page 2. The expense report from Cheryl highlighting the Louisville flight that landed 2 hours before the surgery. Page 3. The photocopy of Dr. Felton's handwritten note confirming the tremor and the fatal error. Page 4. The letter Nate had received late last night from the Hamilton County District Attorney's Office confirming the opening of a grand jury investigation into the death of Alan Price. I stacked them. I aligned the edges on the mahogany desk until they were perfectly flush. Then I slid them into a thick cream-colored envelope. I sealed it. I didn't lick the adhesive. I used a damp sponge, pressing it down firmly, sealing the contents like a tomb. I went upstairs and showered. I dried my hair straight. I put on the navy blue dress. Preston had always hated. He said it made me look severe. He said it made me look like a schoolmarm. I looked in the mirror. I didn't look like a schoolmarm. I looked like a judge. I drove Paige to Faye's house. She sat in the passenger seat, her backpack on her lap. Mom, she said. Her voice was small. What happens tonight? Tonight, I said, keeping my eyes on the road, I am going to have a conversation with your father. Is he going to be mad I turned onto Faith Street? The trees were bare, their branches scratching at the sky. He is going to be a lot of things, Paige, but he's never going to hurt us again. I dropped her off. I watched her walk up the path to Faith's front door. She turned and waved a hesitant, jerky motion. I waved back. Then I drove to the restaurant. Marcello's was the kind of place where you went to be seen, but not heard. The lighting was low, the tablecloths were heavy linen, and the air smelled of roasted garlic and brown butter. It was 7:30. The dinner rush was just beginning. I stood at the entrance for 30 seconds. I wasn't hesitating. I was calibrating. I saw them at table 4. Preston was wearing his navy suit, the one with the silk lining. He was holding a glass of red wine by the stem, swirling it gently. He looked relaxed. He looked like a man who had successfully filed an emergency custody motion and bullied his wife into submission. Cheryl sat across from him. She was wearing red. She looked stunning, but she also looked rigid. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. She wasn't looking at Preston. She was looking at the candle in the center of the table, watching the flame flicker. Preston said something. He laughed. It was a rich, expansive sound. He thought Cheryl was there to celebrate his victory. He thought she was his trophy. He didn't know she was his executioner. I walked across the dining room. The carpet swallowed the sound of my heels. A waiter stepped aside to let me pass. A couple at a nearby table looked up, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. I reached the table. Cheryl saw me first. Her eyes widened, but she didn't move. She just pressed her lips together and looked down at her plate. Preston turned. His smile didn't vanish. It just froze a muscle ticking in his jaw as he processed my presence. He set his wine glass down. "Dana," he said. His voice was smooth, pitched perfectly for a public space. "I didn't think you would come." I pulled out the empty chair between them. I sat down. I placed my clutch on the table. "You wanted to talk," I said, "so here I am." He looked at me with a mixture of amusement and pity. He thought I was there to beg. He thought I was there to trade my dignity for visitation rights. "I am glad you came to your senses," he said. He gestured to Cheryl. "You know Cheryl, of course. She has been very supportive during this difficult time." He was parading her. He was rubbing my nose in it. "Hello, Cheryl," I said. "Hello, Dana," she whispered. She didn't look up. Preston leaned back. He steepled his fingers. "I have the paperwork ready, Dana. The custody agreement. If you sign it tonight, if you agree to the psychiatric evaluation, I am willing to let you have supervised visits on weekends." I looked at him. I really looked at him. The perfectly trimmed hair, the manicured fingernails, the arrogance that radiated off him like heat. "I am not here to sign anything, Preston," he sighed. "Then why are you here? To make a scene? To embarrass yourself further?" I reached into my purse. I pulled out the envelope. It hit the table with a heavy, solid sound. I slid it across the linen. It glided past the breadbasket, past the wine glass, and came to rest against his hand. "Congratulations," I said. "You are free." He frowned. He looked at the envelope, then at me. "What is this? Open it," I said. He hesitated. For the first time, a shadow of doubt crossed his face. He looked at Cheryl. She was staring at her water glass like it contained the secrets of the universe. He picked up the envelope. He broke the seal. He pulled out the first page. The email from Weston. His face went still. He read it. He put it down. He pulled out the second page. The flight logs from Cheryl. Louisville to Cincinnati. Arrival 6 in the morning. His color began to drain. The ruddy confidence bleached out of his cheeks, leaving him gray and waxy. He looked at Cheryl. "You gave her this," he hissed. Cheryl didn't answer. She took a sip of water. Her hand was shaking, but she didn't apologize. "Keep reading," I said. He pulled out the third page, the Felton note. Attending appeared fatigued. Judgment calls questionable. His hand dropped to the table. The paper fluttered. "This is a forgery," he said. His voice was tight-strained. "Felton is senile. This won't stand up in court. Read the last page, Preston." He looked into the envelope. He didn't want to pull it out. He knew instinctively that the last page was the one that ended him. He pulled it out. The letterhead of the district attorney. Target letter. Grand jury investigation. Wrongful death. Fraud. The silence at the table was absolute. The jazz piano in the corner seemed to fade away. The clatter of silverware vanished. There was only the sound of Preston Calloway's life dismantling itself brick by brick. He looked up at me. His eyes were wide hollow. The narcissist mask had cracked, and underneath there was nothing but a terrified small man. "You can't do this," he whispered. "I am the chief of surgery. I am. I am your husband." "Not anymore," I said. I stood up. I smoothed my dress. I felt light. I felt weightless. "You should call a lawyer, Preston," I said. "A criminal lawyer." Tonight, he opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked at Cheryl, begging for an ally. Cheryl finally looked up. She met his gaze, then looked at me. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. She wasn't his anymore either. I turned and walked away. I walked through the restaurant past the maitre d', past the couples celebrating anniversaries and birthdays. I walked out into the cold December air. I got into my car. I didn't start the engine immediately. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, waiting for the crash, waiting for the tears, waiting for the fear. But there was nothing. Just a quiet, steady hum in my chest. My phone buzzed. It was Paige. "Mom, are you okay?" I picked up the phone. I dialed her number. "I am okay, sweetie," I said. "I am coming to get you." "Did you talk to him?" "I did." "Is it over?" "Yes," I said. "It is over." There was a pause on the line, then Paige's voice, small and hopeful. "Can we get cheese fries? The ones from the diner," I laughed. It was a rusty sound, something I hadn't used in a long time. "Yes," I said. "We can get cheese fries." I started the car and drove away from Marcello's. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I knew what was back there. A man sitting in the wreckage of his own ego. I was looking forward. The fallout was slow, and then it was very fast. The Ohio Medical Board suspended Preston's license 3 days later, pending the investigation. The hospital placed him on administrative leave the same afternoon. They didn't defend him. When the subpoena for the internal archives arrived, the hospital board voted unanimously to cooperate. They cut him loose to save the institution. The story broke in the Cincinnati Enquirer a week later. Local surgeon under investigation for DNA fraud and manslaughter. They didn't name Paige. They didn't name me. But in Carterville, everyone knew. Lorraine called me once. It was a Tuesday. I was in the middle of a meeting with Nate. I answered the phone on speaker. "You have ruined us," she said. Her voice was shaking with rage. "The Calloway name." "Do you know what they are saying at the club?" "I know, Lorraine," I said. "They are saying your son is a criminal. He gave you everything. He gave me a lie," I said. "And he gave me a daughter who deserves better than to be a secret." I hung up. I blocked the number. Preston was indicted in February. Reproductive fraud wasn't a felony statute on its own yet, but the district attorney got creative. Assault, wire fraud for the fake payments, and involuntary manslaughter for Alan Price. Cheryl Barton testified before the grand jury in exchange for immunity. She left town the next day. I heard she moved to Chicago, started over in a different industry. I didn't wish her well, but I didn't wish her ill. She had handed me the knife when I needed it. That was enough. In April, exactly 1 year after the Easter dinner that started it all, I drove Paige to Columbus. It was a bright, clear Saturday. The trees were budding a hazy green mist hanging over the highway. We met Dottie Price at a small cemetery on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't a sad place. It was quiet, peaceful, filled with old oaks and chirping birds. Dottie was waiting by a simple granite headstone. Alan Michael Price. Beloved brother and son. She was holding a photo album. She didn't hug me. She hugged Paige. It was a long, fierce embrace, the kind that bridges the gap between strangers and family. He liked jazz, Dottie told Paige, as they sat on a stone bench nearby. And he was terrible at math, but he could draw anything. He used to sketch on napkins at diners. Paige smiled. "I sketch on my homework," she said. I stood back, leaning against a tree, watching them. I saw the resemblance in the curve of their spines, in the way they both tilted their heads when they listened. Preston had tried to overwrite this. He had tried to edit biology with arrogance and money. But the truth has survived. It has survived in the blood, in the bone, in the instincts of a 14-year-old girl who liked to draw. I looked down at my phone. A text from Faye. Lunch, next week I found a new place, I typed back. Yes, I looked at the date. April 15th, tax day. For the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about the deadline. I had filed my own return early. Single. Head of household. I wasn't Mrs. Calloway anymore. I wasn't the doctor's wife. I wasn't the woman who sat in the corner of the table and cleaned up the mess. I was Dana. I watched my daughter laugh at something her aunt said. The sound carried on the wind light and free. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of damp earth and new grass. It smelled like spring. This story isn't just about a medical scandal or a broken marriage. It is about the dangerous difference between keeping the peace and keeping a secret. You might have spent years convincing yourself that silence is a virtue, that swallowing your doubts is the price of a stable home. But Dana proves that intuition is never wrong. That quiet nagging feeling in the pit of your stomach, the one that tells you the numbers don't add up or the smile doesn't reach their eyes, is not paranoia. It is your survival instinct screaming to be heard. You cannot build a life on a foundation someone else laid in the dark. If you are standing in a room where you feel small so someone else can feel big, you are not in a partnership. It is terrifying to pull the thread that unravels the tapestry of your life. But as we saw with Dana, the truth is the only solid ground worth standing on. Have you ever ignored a red flag just to avoid an argument? Have you ever looked at the person across the dinner table and realized you were protecting a stranger? I want to hear your story. Tell me about the moment you finally decided to trust your gut in the comments below, because your voice deserves to be heard, and it is never too late to reclaim the narrative of your own life.